The Power here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one, I'm going to be going over the very best cards from Obsidian Flames. So, as many of you probably know already, basically, Obsidian Flames really isn't the best set. It does release on August 11th, thankfully, but it is made up of only one mini set from Japan, so the other cards are mainly bulk from beginner-friendly products over there, so they have a lot of these starter decks that we just never get. So all of those EX Pokemon are basically coming over to our set with the exception of Greninja EX. However, despite this, the set does have some fun new decks, which is of course always nice to see, and the set also happens to be close to 151, which releases in September. So the wait for more decks basically isn't too painful, so it's not like there's going to be another 3-month gap before we get another set. There will be another pretty large set because it does feature the original 151 Pokemon, plus some trainer cards, so that set is also releasing pretty soon in September. But just kicking things off, we have some rogue decks and memes just very quickly, just some stuff to go over. I know some people think these cards, or some of them, are pretty good. I'm personally not sold on these at all, but just thought they were quickly worth mentioning. The one card here that isn't got a translation yet because it's just that bad is the Seismitoad. It does have a pretty cool ability that says your opponent's active attacks cost 1 color more, and then its main attack does 120 and then 100 more next turn, assuming you, of course, survive. So just a fun little stage 2 there. We've also got Blossom King Gambit, which has the attack Execute, which is pretty decent. There's also Decidueye EX, which isn't terrible, has like a free pivot ability. Houndsdoomy EX has some decent synergy with Gardevoir and such. Claydol can just knock out anything effectively with comboed Poison, which is nice. Whiscash could be decent with Reverse Energy for a decent mill option. And then Polmot EX, kind of outclassed by Ampharos, to be honest, because Ampharos can be just built into the Lightning type deck anyway, but of course Polmot is nice for that sniping capability. Next up though is we do have some more honourable mentions, I guess. We've just got 3 of them here. I'm not sold on these cards at all, but some people really like them, so I thought I'd include them. We've got Plafin, Scizor, and Mawile. I think respectively they all have a little niche to fill in. Plafin, I think, will be a lot better when we get a inevitable Plafin EX. I think it is inevitable that we will get one. So, I think a decent single price attacker in that deck will be needed. So, depending on how good Plafin EX is, hopefully it's pretty strong. Then, I could definitely see this Plafin being playable, especially with the Finzian that has the attack that allows you to search your deck for a Plafin and evolve it. Going second, then you can switch it with one of your bench, so it even has synergy with Justice Kick, which is really cool. And then for Scizor and Mawile, I think these cards are okay. Scizor or Scizor. Punishing Scissors is fine. I've seen some people really rave about this card. I'm not sold on it because Flapple really hasn't done anything outside of Zoroark Box. And the Weavile from the Sun and Moon era, which had this exact same attack, it was just for Dark Energy. That Weavile did see play in some decks like Zoroark Weavile and the Shrine Box that was really popular at the time. But honestly, I just don't think decks really warrant themselves to include these 2/2 lines or these even 1/1 lines of certain cards. So honestly, I don't think Scizor is particularly great. Although, to be honest, the 10 plus modifier is substantially better than 50 plus because, well, the 50 times on the Flapple. So, I guess Scizor has some nice merits there. Honestly, I don't think this card is super great. And then Mawile is just kind of a niche option against decks that would just play a limited amount of special energy. But next up, because we're finally getting into the top 10 list here, is we've got Toadscruel. Toadscruel is a bit of a fun one. It does have a very powerful ability that would prevent Sableye from placing damage counters. And then the attack Colony Rush does 80 damage and then 40 more for each of your bench Pokemon with any grass energy attached to them. Which honestly is a pretty strong modifier. It's definitely better than a lot of other awkward modifiers. So the fact that we need at least 1 grass energy on all our bench Pokemon is a little bit annoying. Thankfully, we do have stuff like Charm, though, and Gardenia's Vigor if you really wanted to accelerate that energy. Of course, once they evolve to Toadscruel, then you can't use Charm, which is more awkward than you would think. It also doesn't specify grass Pokemon with grass energy, which is really nice, so we can actually use stuff like Bibarel or even Gardevoir to accelerate some energy and draw cards, which is very nice. So I do think Toadscruel has at least some potential, but I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't be surprised, I guess what I'm trying to say, is if this card was to see more play in the future if we get better grass support and better grass Pokemon. So yeah, Toadscruel, nothing terrible, but nothing too great either. Next up is we have Tyranitar. Now, initially Tyranitar was a lot higher up in this list, and then I just straight up forgot about other cards, so Tyranitar had to be bumped down quite considerably. But basically, this Tyranitar has these 2 attacks, Mountain Bash and Thor's Rampage. Thor's Rampage is like the main appeal really, 150, and if any of your bench Pokemon are damaged, that does 100 more damage. So pretty strong damage output, honestly. Pretty easy to get going as well with stuff like Gapejaw Bog and the Dodrio coming out in 151. But of course, that Dodrio is not an Obsidian Flame, so you do have to wait a bit longer before I think Tyranitar gets pretty strong. Tyranitar could also be paired up with Pidgeot EX, which is a nice option, despite being 2 different Stage 2s. We even got like the single prize Tyranitar, which isn't shown here, of course, but you know, it's just an option, I guess, if you want to play Dark Energy or Luminous. So I don't think Tyranitar is terrible, but needing 2 energy is a bit awkward. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but you know, it needs 2 energy, so you will have to get those manual attachments in. You will have to use stuff like Raihan potentially. You will have to, you know, find a way of damaging your own bench. So it is a little bit annoying. I think this card will be a lot stronger with Dodrio, but right now I don't think it's particularly great. Next up is we have Cleffa. I'm not paired up with any other images here because I don't think Cleffa really fits one deck in particular. It's more like a universal option that any deck can really play. And it does kind of fill that niche that Snorlax Gourmandize did from Vivid Voltage, which is ironic since both these sets are pretty bulky. But basically, I don't think this Cleffa is super strong, but I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being a one-off in some decks just down the line, really. Especially if the format ever slowed down. And of course, you know, Sableye does pick this card apart. But, you know, if you have to use Cleffa just once in the early game, gets knocked out anyway, then Sableye shouldn't really be much of an issue unless you're, like, trying to attack first. So I don't think Cleffa is the worst card ever. Free Retreat is obviously amazing. Free Attack is nice. I just don't think it has maybe a single home right now, unless maybe some kind of control deck or even a Stage 2 deck. I will definitely be trying out Cleffa in Charizard, for example, but I don't think this card is super strong, but still definitely worth picking up and worth considering. Next up, though, is we actually have Pokemon HQ. I've seen a lot of slander for this card online. I'm not sure because it's like a control-based card, and then people really don't like that, usually. But honestly, I don't think Pokemon HQ is really that bad of a card. It is a bit annoying against stuff like Chien-Pao, because Chien-Pao, of course, has to, you know, use Baxcalibur anyway, so that's a bit unfortunate. But against stuff like Lost Zone, as well as Miraidon, even attackers like Giratina V and Arceus V, for example, this card could be really annoying and very disruptive, so I thought it was worth including on the list. Maybe it is more of an honorable mention than a card that will see a ton of play, but I do think this card has honestly solid potential, especially if we see more competitive basics in the Paradox sets, so I wouldn't be surprised if Pokemon HQ ends up seeing a bunch of play down the line. Next up, though, is we have Letter of Encouragement. Wasn't sure what to pair this with, really, but I think Chien-Pao Baxcalibur is a natural pick. There is other stuff like Charm Boxes, for example, and even Dugong potentially. But I think this card could be just really nice. It's not really a card that you can play a lot of because it has the requirement that something have to be knocked out, which is happening a lot of turns in the TCG, of course, but, you know, requiring something to be knocked out is a bit frustrating. And it is in your opponent's last turn, so you can't use stuff like Fortress to trigger it. So, like, it could be what word am I looking for here? Niche one-of, I guess. Because, you know, you could use Arven or even Pidgeot to find it, so I don't think this card is terrible. I just don't think it's particularly great either, so I wouldn't be surprised if this does see a limited amount of play, though, in some decks that would want to play it. Next up, though, is Vespiquen EX, which I'm not sure that's spelled Vespiquen or Vespiquen, but either way, this Queen Bee is honestly pretty solid, 270 HP, quite nice, quite tanky. Then 2 attacks, Recovery Pheromones is pretty meh, but Phantom Queen doing 200 damage for 3 grass. And then you place 3 damage counters on each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that already has any damage counters attached to it. So pretty solid attack. Of course, we don't have many ways of placing damage counters already, aside from stuff like Gapejaw Bog and Howlucha. But imagine if we ever get some kind of ability that allows us to place damage counters, or some kind of better spread attacker, I guess, then I could honestly see Vespiquen being really strong in the future. And of course, needing Grass Energy means we'd have to use Charm or Gardenia as opposed to Gardevoir. So that is a bit annoying, I guess, but honestly, I think Phantom Queen is a pretty strong attack. You just have to get the damage counters on there in the first place, which is why a lot of people have reservations about this card. But I do think it has more potential in the future as opposed to something like Tyranitar, so that's why it's higher on the list. Next up is we have Glimmora. So fun fact, when I was making this video, I actually forgot about Glimmora EX. So yeah, Glimmora after 4th, sadly, but I do think Glimmora deserves the 4th position because the ability is super annoying. You know, if you've ever been Averied online or Collapse Stadium, it's super frustrating. you lose a lot of momentum in the game, and with attack like Poisonous Gem and a single prize Glimmora that's really annoying, even new Pokemon League headquarters, and Ting Lu EX as well for additional support. Honestly, I think this card is really strong. It's nothing too crazy, it's not broken or anything. The most it's going to be like a tier 2 deck maybe. But honestly, I don't think Glimmora is terrible. There's also the Glimmet with Ascension, which is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people like this card, and I do as well. So Glimmora definitely deserves the 4th position in my opinion. But, if this is a bit of a hot take, then let me know, I guess. But yeah, don't think Glimmora is that bad at all. Next up, though, it's got Pidgeot EX. This might surprise some people because people Pidgeot has 2 fan bases right now, or, 2 groups of people that think either this card is going to be broken, it's going to change the game, or, it's kind of just terrible. And honestly, I'm kind of in the middle. I think there is maybe some other people who think that as well. I don't think this card is trash, but I don't think it's broken either. The ability is, of course, amazing, but it's still a stage 2. And the format where Pidgeot was such a good Pokemon is obviously very different to this format. For those of you who don't know, there was a rebuild Pidgeot that saw a whole bunch of play that had this exact same ability. But of course, that format was more friendly to Stage 2 Pokemon. This format really isn't, especially when your basics and Stage 1s really need to be doing something, where, God of War has that, at least has that going for it. And, Chien-Pao Baxcalibur at least has, Stage 1 support in the form of, like, Arida, I guess, to find the Stage 2s and rare candies. So I don't think Pidgeot is great, but maybe, like, a 2-2 line, skipping the Stage 1. It could be decent in stuff like Arceus, maybe even other Stage 2 decks that already play rare candies. You could do something control-based where you have, like, I don't know, Pokemon League headquarters. Maybe even you get Path to the Peak involved, you get a bit spicy. Even Wigglytuff EX maybe, because it also uses colorless energy cost. So honestly, I think there's some decent potential for this card. It's maybe down the line when the format eventually gets slower, hopefully. But again, I don't think this card is super great. I just think it'll be more of a niche deck. Next up, though, is we have Town Store, which has some decent synergy. And honestly, the more I thought about this card, the more I was like, okay, maybe this is a lot better than I thought it was initially. So once during a turn, you can search your deck for any tool card, which just means that if you're playing something like New VMAX, where you just kind of want to play a lot of niche tools, and sometimes it's difficult to find the exact tool that you want, Town Store just means you can go and find that tool card. There's also like some decent Pokemon to pair this with, like the Electrode that has Boom Boom Chain, as well as Revroom EX, which can have up to 4 tool cards attached to it. So Town Store, honestly, pretty solid stadium. I didn't know where to put Revroom on this list, so I just kind of lumped it in with Town Store, by the way. So that's the ranking, I guess, for Revroom. It's not really a second place card, but either way, I don't think Town Store is terrible. I think it has a better chance of seeing more play. And of course, if we ever get any better tool cards or more powerful tools, then of course Town Store can end up seeing a lot more play. But in first place, I did go for Charizard EX. I know this is going to be a bit controversial because some people just really aren't sold on this card. A lot of people prefer the Charizard EX from the next set, which is over there on the left-hand side, because it does a lot of damage. I personally don't think that Charizard is very good, but it will be a nice option for this Charizard. Why I think that is because this Charizard can accelerate energy, and it has a really nice attack that scales throughout the whole game, whereas Charizard EX, the first one, for 4 energy, so you do have to use the other Charizard or like a single prize Charizard, and that's obviously really awkward to run multiple in the same deck. So I don't think the Charizard EX from 151 is the best card ever, but honestly, it could be a decent partner for this Charizard. There's also the Entei from Obsidian Flames, which hasn't been translated, but it does have the ability that actually says it takes 20 less damage from attacks, which could be useful in some situations, but the main attack does 60 damage for 3 colors, and then 20 more for each Pharyngy attached to this Pokemon. So, decent single prize option, and of course you could pair it with Pidgeot. But that's where I have my number 1 position with Charizard EX. Probably a bit controversial because some people don't like this card, but that's just my opinion, of course. So thanks for watching. What would you change about this list? It's of course been Emma Power, and thank you for watching.